Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Ed Cesare, chair of York Yacht Club's Rating, Rule, and Measurement Committee. I have a great panel to work with tonight, composed of Clare Harrington, of course, New York Yacht Club Race Committee chair, Andrew Weiss, who is owner and New York Yacht Club member, Andrew Weiss, who is owner and skipper of the Kerr Fast 40 Christopher Dragon. Yes, it is Christopher Dragon, not Green Dragon. I apologize already to Andrew for getting the name of his boat wrong. That was my fault, not Stu's, notwithstanding the fact that I've raced Christopher Dragon for at least 40 years. So I'm losing it, but thanks for being here, Andrew. And Larry Fox, who navigates for Chris, or navigates for Andrew aboard Christopher Dragon. Larry is also the rating rule chair at Trysail Club, and developed important pieces of our deck tonight for Trysail. So many thanks to Larry and Trysail for helping us out there. I know a guy over at that club who allowed us access to Larry. And James Knight, New York Yacht Club Racing Rule and Measurement Committee member, recovering sailmaker, and frequent shipmate. We sailed together aboard Patty Young and Paul Hamilton's Entropy. Patty and Paul are themselves in the middle of an ORC examination and optimization of their new boat. So I suspect they might be with us tonight. We've got a very informal Q&A set up tonight. We're hoping it'll be conversational. We'll have time for questions. I think the objective of this session is to give the fleet a sense of how this rule works. I mean, it's a big topic. I think what the club feels is as we roll into its pervasive use for the first time this summer, we want everybody to kind of know what they're getting. We think that's very important for people to understand the rule, to continue to view it favorably, and feel like they know what's going on when the score sheets come out. So that's our objective. Ground rules for tonight. We welcome questions. We'll hold those till we've gotten through the deck. And please submit your questions in the Q&A function in the scroll bar at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat. Q&A, please, for the questions. And with that, we'll get rolling. I'm operating the slides myself, so bear with me on that. Okay, so how did the club get to this decision? As most of you, I'm sure, know, recently here in the States, we've had 3 measurement rules: IRC, ORR, and ORC. And I think most of us can agree that that's too many. It's been my observation that indeed it started to depress fleet sizes. So we need to work to somewhere different. IRC and ORC are both owned by the Rourke in England and the Offshore Racing Congress, which is largely a European-based organization. Both are recognized by World Sailing. ORR is a rule that's quite similar to ORC and is owned and run by the Offshore Rake Association. It's pretty much a North American rule only. As many of you know, the MAC races have recently jumped to ORC. I will say ORR is still strong on the West Coast. We've had some questions about this galaxy, and we'll get to those later on. ORC lately has gained a lot of ground. It has an open VPP, which people naturally gravitate to. It's got some scoring options, which people naturally gravitate to. They say, hey, oh yeah, my boat's no good in heavy air, and the rule accounts for that. Yeah, okay, we'll get to more of that too. And importantly, it's got a robust back office operation. And ORC is the measurement rule that the club will use this summer. I'll just say briefly, the club is also offering PHRF. We think it's still an important spot for that as an entry-level rule. A lot of people love it. Works just great for a lot of teams, and we will continue to offer it. As I mentioned, ORC has a lot of different scoring tools, and people gravitate towards that and like it. It's got a way to account for how much wind there is during the race. It's got a way to account for the configuration of the race course and the true wind angles that are experienced by competitors as they go along. These true wind angle assumptions are important. They're contained in the various wind matrices. We'll get to some more of that. ORC also has two flavors, an ORC International Certificate, which is a fully measured certificate, which involves a measurer coming to your boat, and an ORC Club Certificate, which is developed by owner reported data, by data reported by the owner sailmaker, and then supplemented by data sourced by either ORC or US Sailing in the public domain, or from whatever sources they can use. So it's an easy way to get a certificate. We'll talk about that some more too. Lastly, on this slide, I just want to say it's important for all competitors to recognize that with these tools, complexity enters into the picture. There's more complexity for organizing authorities, more complexity for race committee officers to implement the rule, and more complexity for competitors, which we'll see coming up. With that, let's talk about the rule. And I'll ask my colleague here on the panel, Larry Fox. So tell us, Larry, just what is the VPP rule?
You're on mute, Mr. Fox.
And you're on mute, Larry. One point for you.
There are many people who have tried to keep me on mute at various times, so we'll take that as my down payment on that. VPP stands for Velocity Prediction Program, and it is really just what it sounds like. Looks at your boat's hull shape, its displacement, its appendages, the rig, sails, crew weight, and it predicts how fast the boat's going to go in any true wind speed, true wind angle combination. And those predictions, or properly calculations, are your polars. And they also include, beyond just those angles, what your optimum is, upwind and downwind. So your optimum true wind angle, target boat speed at that angle for each wind strength.
So it predicts how fast your boat is going. And those are, as most probably know, referred to as polars. And on the right side of the screen, there is a diagram showing those boat speeds and true wind angles, which are the predictions, which are the polar. So here's a loaded question, Larry. You can give it a short answer, but are those polars accurate?
Well, they can be pretty close. ORC continues to develop its VPP and with data gleaned from the real world experience, and it's tweaked and the polars improved every year. So it's clearly on a good trajectory. You know, that said, polars don't address unstable wind conditions. They don't address sea states. Sometimes struggle when you get into very tight angles upwind or broader than optimum downwind. So they're not without challenges, but they're a pretty good start. And you know, you got to remember, half of it's the polars, maybe a little less than half of it is the crew sailing to the polars, getting the most out of the boat. So you know, turning them into ratings, as we'll talk about, I think is the real trick.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the predictions occur for given true wind strengths and given true wind angles. So let's talk about true wind strengths first. How does the rule deal with anticipating true wind strength?
Well, there are really two methods of getting to true wind speed. The first is a single number, and the second is triple number. Single number looks at your polars across the full range from 6 knots to 20 knots, which are the true wind speeds the VPP focuses on, and arrives by weighting it at sort of a percentage performance across that whole thing. Triple number gets a little finer, and it says, let's break that 6 to 20 range into sort of 3 sub-ranges, if you will. More or less 6 to 8, you know, 8 to 14, 14 to 16. And within each of those, there's a similar approach to weighting. So what we're doing here on wind is we're giving the race committee options to describe the course, either in terms of single number or in terms of choosing a wind strength and triple number that best reflects the conditions that are experienced when we go out to sail.
Okay, so if there's uncertainty in the future, one might use a single number. If you can have some idea of conditions, you could use the triple number: low, medium, and high. And I think what's significant about that is that's what immediately is facially attractive to people. Is, oh yeah, my boat's bad in heavy air. It's good in light air. My boat is bad in light air. So when we use the light air wind band, I'm going to be better off, which is largely true, right?
Yeah, I think the key is it gives the race committee flexibility and control. So you're going to have a race. It's going to have a wide array of boats in one class, ratings at far ends of the spectrum. It's a fairly casual race. You're likely to gravitate towards a single number approach and something like that. You have a more serious fleet, classes with narrower bands, a race committee that can really, focus on what's happening across the course and make those decisions. You have a real good opportunity to use triple number to the advantage and deliver what our competitors are looking for, a really, a great racing experience.
Great. So that's true wind strength. Let's talk about true wind angle, which is in many ways a little bit of a thornier problem, right?
Yeah. So ORC actually offers an unlimited number of ways to think about true wind angle, and each is captured with the notion of a wind matrix. So let's just talk about that a little bit. The matrix says what percentage of my time, or what percentage of my distance actually on the course, is covered at a particular true wind angle. And in the case of wind range, it's the true wind speed as well. And so that course, in its simplest form, a windward leeward, half upwind, half downwind, very straightforward. But it can be as involved as you want it to be.
Yeah.
In terms of selecting one of the myriad course options, and we have some of the U.S. national ones shown on this slide at the right, predominantly upwind and downwind, but it also gets into custom versions for races. So
right. So you mentioned the simplest one, Larry, is windward leeward.
Yep.
The next simplest one is all purpose, right? And all purpose assumes what?
So all purpose is different this year, and maybe that makes it worth focusing on for a moment. Last year, we talked about sailing on a predominantly offshore or distance rating. That's no longer in use in North America. It's been replaced by the all-purpose. What all-purpose basically does is it looks at equally at each of the true wind angles that the rule uses to calculate a rating. And there are 8 of those plus upwind and downwind. And by doing that, if you think of it as I'm doing a race around an island, or I'm sailing a distance race to a known point, but I don't know what the wind is going to do, that's a very effective way of arriving at a fair rating for that kind of situation.
Yeah. So just to summarize in simple terms, all purpose assumes you sail the same amount of distance at all of the wind angles that are in the
all of the rated wind angles. Yeah.
Great. So you mentioned the custom courses in that, and some of them appear in that box on the right, which will appear on your certificate, that box here in the United States. There are different boxes in different jurisdictions, but you can see at the bottom that some prominent races have asked ORC to develop custom courses for them, which reflect true wind angle distances, proportional distances, which they find to be typical for their race courses. That's pretty interesting, of course, until you get an anomalous running of the race. But notwithstanding, those are useful things.
Well, and even there, if you look at Chicago Met, they've prepared 3 distinct options depending on the kind of wind forecast they're looking at the start of the race.
Yeah.
And so there's even that level of flexibility to have multiple custom configurations for a race and choose one close to race time.
And something in between the all-purpose windward leeward simple versions and those custom versions is predominantly upwind and predominantly downwind. One can choose, a race committee could choose, and these are useful in point-to-point races. And those are the wind matrices for single number, one wind speed assumed, predominantly upwind and predominantly downwind. And those are the proportions of distance which the rule will then assume the boat sails during that particular race. And we put this slide up really for just one reason, and that's to emphasize that the rating at the end of the day is overwhelmingly influenced by the wind matrix. I called it in another presentation, the tyranny of the wind matrix. That's what's going to make the decision at the end of the day in the rule. And obviously, the more matrices you have, the more flexibility there is, and the closer to real world you're likely to become. But there is a limit to that, and I think it's important that the fleet understand that.
Ed, we used to say, with single number ratings back with IRC and with PERF for that matter, we used to say, every boat has its day. And in some ways, even with a wind matrix, which is more precise, you still get that same thing.
Yeah, great point, Larry. Great point. So let's talk about implementing the rule and race management and the race committee. Offshore, the ORC publishes a race management guide, which is good reading for competitors as well as race officers. And there's a lot of resources on the ORC website, orc.org. We'll talk about some more of those in a little bit. Claire, tell us a little bit about what course configurations and wind strength numbers we expect to use this summer.
Okay, thank you, Ed, and good evening, everyone. Glad to be here. So the race management guide manual gives pretty specific directions and suggestions about how to implement this ORC rating and to make it as fair and predictable as we can for the competitors. As mentioned earlier, the most straightforward option is the windward leeward races. And of course, for an event such as the annual regatta, most of the races will be scored triple number, windward leeward, very straightforward. Some of the single number options that we'll be using this summer, for example, the around the island, where you're going to have a myriad of different circumstances and wind angles and possibly speed. The Leukemia Cup and the Queen's Cup. Queen's Cup will probably use triple number because it's more specific. We have drop market races for that. And then on the cruise, for example, it will use predominantly upwind or predominantly downwind. Most of the squadron runs for the cruise are straight on point to point runs. So that should be fairly straightforward for the predominantly up or downwind. And then, as many of you know, you've all sailed this course. When we're, for example, in annual regatta or any of the regattas where we have the larger boats outside in Rhode Island Sound, and sometimes the last race of the day, it's a wonderful option to be able to do some windward leeward legs and then send you in to race into the harbor and finish in the vicinity of Fort Adams.
Right.
Sorry?
Oh, go ahead, Glenn. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. We love that option. And I know that a lot of competitors love to do that as well. It does present some complications. And right now, we are working on a plan to try to see if we can manage that appropriately.
Yep. And with that, let me bring in James Knight, who is doing some experimenting for us, Claire, right, with this?
Sure.
We had a conference call about this a week or so ago.
Yep.
And not surprisingly, coming up with a solution and tools for this Foxtrot leg is a little bit more complicated than at least I expected when first thinking about it. So, James, let me just mention also that you're working with young member Casey Brown on this. You two guys are hard at it. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, as you said, I've been working with Casey on this, and so the project is to test and validate the accuracy of the ice system on the Foxtrot leg. So as Claire mentioned, this is going to be racing from area A or B, finishing off of Fort Adams. One of the benefits of ORC over IRC, for example, is the open source nature of the data. So this means with this project, we have access to all the necessary rating certs and VPP info for the test subject boats. What we're doing is we're using that data to simulate results across a range of wind angles and across all 3 wind velocity brackets. I think as yourself and Larry mentioned earlier, there are different tools and different options as to how we actually create this course, and the testing is going to prove out which is going to be better. But I want to just kind of go on record saying that we're focused on providing a solution that's not only accurate, but it's easy for the race committee to deploy and manage.
Great point.
This is a work in progress right now. So we hope to see results in the next 7 days.
That's great. A great segue to the next slide, James, which is when we do need to choose a wind band, Claire. Can I skip a slide? Yes, I did. When we do need to use the triple wind band, we need to figure out how much wind there is. And tell us about how we're going to do that.
Right. So, our focus is very much on data collection and having accurate data and frequent data, and to be able to make good informed decisions about what these wind bands are going to be. And as mentioned earlier, the low, if we're using the matrix using the wind bands, the low end is 9 knots and below. Medium is 9 to 14 knots, and high is 14 knots and above. So those are kind of raw numbers. As you can probably imagine, how often does this actually happen, to stay in a particular band? I mean, when it gets puffy, that gets a little more complicated. We look at other factors too. For example, how are the boats behaving? Are people is the crew on the leeward rail? Are they hiking out hard on the windward rail? And trying to make a decision about what wind band is to be used. All of the mark boats, all 7 ribs, we have 7 of the larger ribs, they're all equipped with anemometers, and they are all calibrated to be identical. The signal boats, where the race officer will be, we'll also have, we use members boats, as you probably know, so we need to have a consistent and accurate wind reading from the signal boat. So we will have anemometers for the signal, for the race officers to take wind readings. Of course, this means a little more work for the recorders. It means a little more work for the mark boat guys and women who are out there collecting the data. So we'll have all that in place, and we're committed to making sure that it's accurate and over the course of any given race. We'll also have written standard operating procedure for all the race officers, so that we're all doing it the same way, so that there's no variation between the A circle or the B circle or up in the bay or wherever we happen to be. We're all running the numbers in the same way.
Great. So I point out, not an insignificant additional body of work that never used to exist. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So once you have the data and the wind band and make a choice, how do you expect to communicate that to the fleet?
So along with everything else we tell you before a race, in other words, the bearing and distance to the first mark and anything else that's pertinent to the race, we will also announce the wind band prior to the warning. So we'll be monitoring wind long before the warning, and we'll make our decision, and then hope that that decision will hold through the course of the race. If it doesn't, if the wind changes, wind speed changes, then we will need to circle back and decide, do we need to change this? And if that's the case, we will do our very best to announce that via VHF and let the competitors know that the wind band has changed and to what it has changed. And that would be communicated before the first boat finishes. So you will have all that information. You know, as if we don't have a big enough target on our back, we do have the ability to change this. And the choice that the race committee makes for the wind band is and this is right from the guide, the race management guide. It's not grounds for a request for redress. So it is what it is, and we obviously will work very hard to make the correct decision, correct and fair decision. Did we lose Ed?
I'm afraid we did.
Is Tim still there? Tim is still there.
He's gone for the moment.
See if we can get him back.
I'm reaching out to him right now.
Andrew, while we're waiting for Ed, I think he was about to ask you to talk a little bit about the difference in the ORCI and ORC Club certificates. Maybe you want to jump into that, and I'm sure Ed will join us back as soon as he can.
Sure. I hope Ed's back in a moment, but the first thing I want to echo is Ed mentioned something at the beginning of this, is there's been way too many rating rules for the years. As a boat owner, it's been very confusing for everybody what rule you're going after. While ORC may not be perfect, it's best that we have ORC and PHRF, which are two distinct rules, and I think that will help the fleets and people sailing and go in the future. So ultimately, everybody should endeavor to get an ORCI certificate, which is a fully measured certificate. But what the easiest thing to get and what to start out with is ORC Club, which if you had a IRC certificate, a OR certificate in the past, it is very easy to get that. You click on to US Sailing and go for revalidation or a new application. And the first thing it asks you, did you have an IRC or an OR certificate? And you just put the number in. And since we all have a universal measurement system now, which is started a few years ago, I think Stan Honey started that. Every rule came together and using all the same measurements. And you will be able to put your information in, take it from the certificate. No measurements are necessary really. And they will produce a ORC Club. And you have to do this for US Sailing. You can't go to ORC International, you can't go anywhere else. It's US Sailing, you got to do it. The person who helps in this is Nathan Titcomb. If you have a problem, he's the person to address it. So you'll fill in the application. It goes off to US Sailing. Hopefully you'll hear back 5-10 days. If you don't, ping them or give them a call on that. Going back to the difference of ORC Club, you're going to get the worst measurements. You're going to get the lightest boat that they've measured. If you have a bar 395 and there were 6 different weights, they're going to give you the lightest boat. They're going to give you, you're on the side of everything that sort of goes against you. If you were back in the IRC days, it's the same as unendorsed to endorsed. If you got an unendorsed certificate, they gave you the light boat, they gave you bigger sails. It may not be exactly what you have. So to really use this rule properly and going forward, really want to get people over to ORCI. Just try it out in ORC Club for a little bit, but really it's best for everybody to move over to I as they can, as they become more competitive and do more racing.
over time. The last couple of years, almost everybody here has been club. But I think that's where the rule is going to go as we get more and more people into it. Still don't have Ed.
Andrew, could you maybe elaborate a little bit about some of the test certificate capabilities and things you've thought about for Dragon that might spark ideas as people think about their ORC ratings?
Well, the first thing we should do is there's a change that happened in 2020 for ORC. ORC didn't really care about your spinnaker sizes or code zeros. And in 2020, they did care about it. It sort of caught everybody off guard. Not very few ORC races were done. So ORC now asks you in this piece, and it comes into what test certificate next, is do you have a mid-girth of less than 85% of any sail? So that's really going to get you past anything but a A2 running spinnaker, some A3s. There used to be sort of this line we sit at 75%, which was a spinnaker to a code a code zero. Nobody crossed that 75% line, so you got hit as a general or a different type of sail. From what I can see, ORC doesn't really care anymore. You can do any type of sail you want. Once you hit below 85%, they are going to measure the sail differently, and it's going to have an effect, as Larry was talking about, and any of your certificates you do other than windward leeward. So all the different variations, it's going to have an effect on that. The good thing about ORC, which is really nice, is test certificates. Once you've got your certificate issued by US Sailing, you can go in and use your sailmaker yourself and just play with it. And you can put in test certificates. You buy things called credits, and the test certificate, I think, run about $9 each one. Sort of gets addictive. You put these things in, you change something, and your credits go down quickly. You could spend a couple $100 a night. It's like going to play poker or something. But you can run a myriad of test certificates, and you put your test certificate in, you watch the thing go, and 60 seconds later, you have a certificate that will show the change you did on the boat. No human interaction is necessary. No sending for, like you did for IRC, to do tests, wait 5 days, pay $200. So you can really experiment with the size spinnaker sails. For Christopher Dragon, which wasn't a boat that was designed to do IRC, ORC, it was designed for IRC, sort of box rule in England for the fast 40s. All the sails on those boats were maximized to a top rating. The curve, when we talked to them, said, all the boats are going to be overpowered at the same time. So everybody had the biggest main, the biggest spinnaker they could have to get to the windward mark. And it didn't really matter if they were overpowered, we all got powered at the same time. When we started running test certificates, we realized that the mains were too big and the spinnakers were too big. And we ran a few different optimizations on it, and we cut down a new main we made next year to a smaller main and a little bit smaller spinnaker, and OR seemed to like that. And we seem to have a little better rating, we hope. We ran a few other optimizations on the boat. Some we did ourselves, one we did in connection with the designer. But you can really do a lot of this yourself or talking to sailmaker, or if you know your boat, if you sailed it over time, you say, well, if I'm going to do a new sail, maybe my sail I'm not so good in light air. I need a bigger main, see what happens. Maybe I'm really good in light air. I'm not so good in the breeze. I want a little bit smaller, be able to handle the boat better. And ORC really has a good tool to allow you to do this. I see Ed is back. So
yes,
sort of explaining the rule. Where are you in filling time when you were here?
Appreciate that, Andrew. It was kind of dark ship there.
Yeah,
what happened to you?
I tried to do justice to your questions, Ed. I'm sure I fell a little short.
Now I know how the master of the evergreen tank, the container ship that's sideways in the Suez Canal feels. Dark ship, sideways.
I think that gentleman would like to be dark still on that.
Anyway, scrambling back here, you guys can see the PowerPoint, although we're almost through it and can get on with questions. Andrew, anything that you and I talked about that you haven't covered already? About getting a certificate? Have you described a little bit about
Yeah,
just that
we
mechanical process.
Yep, describe getting it. I would encourage people not to get frustrated if you're doing it the first time. Two things are very important. Start doing it now. If you get closer to racing and you have problems, it's very difficult for U.S. Sailing, for Nathan. They don't have a whole lot of people working there at the moment to help you. Now it's a little easier. You get it done. If you see any discrepancies in the certificate, you can go back to do it. But if you're doing it, 5 days before the event, you're probably not going to get a great certificate. You're probably going to have problems. You're going to be frustration on your side and U.S. Sailing side. But they have been a great help to me. If you don't get any response, call Nathan. He picks up the phone. The other great asset and the biggest promoter of, I guess, ORC in this country, I think we got here, is Dobbs Davis. And when I called him, he's explained a lot of things to me. He seems always to have time. I know he's on this tonight to help, and he's the biggest proponent of it and understands it. And if when you go to the ORCI, you're going to need to find a measure, and that takes some time. There aren't a whole lot of measures around. A couple up in Newport. Eric Vatinger does it. Another gentleman, can't remember his name, up there. Dobbs does it. But you need to start that planning now, or April 1. Before we know it, we'll be all out sailing, hopefully.
Good, Andrew. Have you talked a little bit about what you and your team on Christopher Dragon have thought about in terms of optimization? Some of the big areas you've hit.
Yep, we talked about that. We as we cut the sail size down, we really went through a lot of different variations of things, and it's as I said, it's just buying the credits and doing it. The other really interesting things I didn't talk about, we talked about is, and I think James talked about it a little bit. You can go see everyone else's certificate, so you can see what other people did on it. And for the code zeros, you go on to the ORC site, world site, and you search for certificates. You can search for you can put the search up for all U.S. certificates, and you can see what a guy with the same type of boat you did when you go to the bottom, what he did for a size of sails, and you say, I was thinking that, and you sort of go the same direction or not. And you could never see that underneath IRC. It's really a good tool to see what other people are thinking, what's looking at, and sort of helps you get in the right direction.
Absolutely, I think it's a really powerful tool, and we're having some of the Q&A questions coming in, and that kind of answers a couple of those. One person was talking about a one design boat, if they could put that into ORC, and let's say you had a Club Swan 42 and you wanted to put some optimized sails on there, you can go and look up other boats in that in that trim. Same with like an old fashioned like J35 or whatever. You can look up, I think it's like 300, I looked up today, 390 J35 ratings in there. So you've got a lot to dig through and figure out where to go.
One thing to add to that, ORC is offering, and someone asked this question directly, one design certificates for classes, and those work where ORC's had the option to measure enough boats in the class to establish a standard, and where boats are certified members of the class sailing under a one design rule. So those exist, and you can see those out on the database as well.
Similarly, I don't know if you guys covered this while I was away, but once you obtain your ORC certificate, your regular ORC certificate, with which you would race in a normally fully crewed and with spinnaker configuration, you can also obtain a certificate for cruising canvas only, jib and main, and a certificate for shorthanded. So once you have those three, you may submit one of them for any regatta. So for example, if you wanted to sail an event in the first week of June fully crewed, you're good to go. If you wanted to sail a double-handed event in July, you could use that other certificate. All three are valid for use in the same season while the underlying certificate is valid. That's a nice feature. I think at this point, James, when I went dark there, unfortunately, I lost the Q&A feed. So you are the possessor of the queue of the question list. I'll rely on you to curate that and see which ones are the best.
Ed, if I may just insert one comment here.
Sure.
So the ORC manual that deals with, managing the races for ORC, the 2021 version is to be distributed sometime soon. And Dobbs Davis did indicate that those wind band numbers that I quoted before are from the present version of the manual. They are to be changed. The wind bands now are 8 and below for low, 12, 8 to 12 for medium, and 12 to 16 for high. So there's a little bit of an adjustment there. There was also a question about, I noticed in the Q&A, about using different wind bands in a particular race. For example, if legs 1 and 2 were in the low range and 3 and 4 in another range, that will not happen. There's only one wind band per race, which is not to say that there might be an adjustment between classes. So for example, if class 1 starts and they're in a high range, and by the time we get to the 4th class, the wind has dropped, it may be that class 4 would be racing under the medium band. So there is some adjustment. And also, I would just add, there was some question about observations of the sailing disposition of the boats. That's just ancillary information. The intention is to use hard data for the choice of the wind bands. So as when I mentioned, are the crews hiking, or are they all on the leeward rail? That's just supporting evidence. We probably wouldn't make the decision based on that, because different boats are going to behave differently for the most part. So
there was a second question on wind strengths related to using different bands for different legs, as opposed to doing the sort of hybrid if you changed in the middle.
mm-hmm.
And although we're not using that at New York Yacht Club this year,
Mm-hmm.
there is constructed course, and that's something we can go into at a later time,
Right.
that allows you to set wind strength and direction for each leg independently during the race.
Yeah.
It's a more advanced, more complex scoring approach,
Right.
but ORC supports it when we get there.
Right. When we grow up, we'll be yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and in the same vein, Larry, there is performance curve scoring, which is also very sophisticated, very interesting, and we will not be using that at New York this summer.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's sailed the Bermuda race in recent years has been exposed to performance curve scoring. Like constructed course, we're not using it this year, so maybe towards the end, if we like, if there's time, we can come back to that, or we'll do something more specific at a later date on constructed course and performance curve scoring.
There was also a question I saw from someone about the Bermuda race. As far as I think we all know, the Bermuda race is staying in ORR, and there's a couple of races left for ORR around the country.
Marblehead Halifax too will be ORR this summer. So
and I think Transpac, and that's.
So James, what give us a question from the list?
Okay, so we've done a good job of answering just in that last few minutes. What have we not seen? So question around crew weight. I know that IRC is a crew number, and they average 75 kilos per crew member. How does ORC look at crew weight?
So I think there are two things we should say about that, perhaps. The first is that the ORC, like the IRC, has maximum crew weight. That's on your certificate. But the second is that ORC looks very specifically in the VPP at where your crew weight is positioned, how far outboard, how much leverage it generates in righting moments, and it accounts for that in the generation of the pullets. So it's a fairly sophisticated approach to where you can position crew weight, and obviously there's some assumptions.
Well, there's one more thing. You can change your crew weight on the ORC certificate.
Yeah,
you can declare different numbers on it.
Yes,
and
but
it affects your rating on what you do.
It does, for exactly this reason. It looks at how much weight is positioned where and how that affects the rating moment of the boat and its displacement. So yes, I mean it's a controllable measurement, but there is a starting baseline that's assumed, and then you can override that, as I understand it.
So what James, IRC had was a default, and that was it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. It looks like
There
we've
was a
covered
question I saw
most.
about the height of the wind measurement on the race committee boats.
I'm sorry, what was the first part of that?
What height are the calibrations done at on the marked boats?
Okay, so
are the wands even, across the chase boats?
yes, they are consistent on the marked boats. It'll vary somewhat on the signal boat because, if it's a larger craft, it'll, will be at varying heights. The recommendation is to have wind readings at 10 meters, which of course will be a challenge. There is discussion about interpolating that that number, but it's as you can imagine, it's difficult at best. I think the fact that we have the resources and the ability to get as much consistent data as we can, I think is we're pretty upfront about that, and we'll do our best to have consistent numbers. The variation to 10 meters, it'll change a bit, but at this point, we don't have a good way to measure that consistently across the course.
But that is, I think it's fair to say, Claire, that 10-meter guidance, which is what the VPP rule assumes the wind is at 10 meters, like the major weather models. We're very active in trying to figure out the fairest way to account for that, right?
Right.
Fair to say.
Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see, a couple things. We know that Dobbs Davis, in fact, is in the audience tonight, and I think he'd probably like to correct a few of the things we've said. So we'll give him a chance. Tim, if you want to unmute Dobbs. Dobbs, we don't want to take the rest of the time with the corrections, but sing out.
I'm just, as we do in these Zoom calls, of course, we have parallel channels of communication, and I've got, just so you know, I've got on WhatsApp my pal who's a race manager over at Costa Smeralda. So he's in Italy 5 hours ahead of us. He's watching this, and he's sending me WhatsApp chat messages along with my text message exploding on other pals. So you've got a great audience here, and I give you guys very high marks for getting most of this spot on, and thank you. There was just one small correction, Claire, on the predominant upwind and downwind matrix. And I'm sorry if there was any confusion. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what's on the screen right now is correct. It wasn't 6, 8, and 10 knots. It was 8, 12, and 16.
Okay.
And on the maybe another aside would be on crew weight. You can declare your crew weight. Andrew got that exactly correct. We do have a little wrinkle in that, though, which is if you're, let's say, entered with a certificate racing at Block Island Race Week, it's 5 days of racing, and one of the days is super light air. You cannot leave half your crew on the dock. That is contrary to the ORC rules, mainly because we've had this experience. And you'll see on the certificate that the minimum weight is 25% less than your declared weight.
I think, Dobbs, we've sort of fixed that over at Storm Trysail ourselves.
Okay.
We're not allowing changes in crew. We're not allowing tenders to bring sails on or off from the time you leave to the race course for the day.
Right. Well, thank you for that. But I just wanted to point that out, that as a default rule on the certificate, which of course can be amended by any OA, whether Storm Trysail or New York Yacht Club. But that's why when you look at your certificate, you'll see that little sort of parenthetical note about 25% minimum. The other thing I want to point out is the certificates themselves are not PDF files. We have, let's say, modernized. Our programmer insists on us being in a digital age and getting out of the age of paper. So the certificates will come as HTML files, which are opened. You can open them within any browser. But the feature that is probably most relevant is that on page 2 of every certificate, whether it's a club or ORCI, you'll see at the bottom a bunch of tabs, a bunch of buttons with different country abbreviations. And the USA, of course, being who we are, we have the most number of options. If you click on any of those other buttons, you'll see a different array of scoring options on page 2. Now, Nathan is issuing certificates from his office that already by default have that USA page open. But if for whatever reason you're running test certificates like Andrew likes to do, keep in mind that in that function, in the sailor services, your test certificates are going to come by default without those USA scoring options on page 2. So you may need in your test certificates to just go down to that page and push the USA button to see what changes there were in your running of the test certificate and how it affects the ratings.
Good job, thank you. James, anything else in the chat there at the moment? I've got one if there's bandwidth for it.
No, not in my list, not as unanswered.
Okay.
What have you got? There was one thing about, sorry, just before you go there, there was one thing about the boat weight that Vice Commodore Zabadakis came up with. And we kind of covered that, I believe, with Andrew's comments about the assumed weight of the boat versus the actual weighed boat and using overhangs. I believe that was answered.
James, if I can just jump in on that one a second, because there's been a back and forth, and there was also a comment from Vice Commodore Zabadakis that it's really important to remember to check the weight and that it matches the actual weighing you were aware of on your certificate, as that wasn't necessarily part in prior rules. Part of the weight question was directed specifically at One Design, and the way the One Design certificate program works is ORC is looking at a group. I'm not sure I know the minimum number, maybe Dobbs has that, of fully One Design compliant specimens of the class that have been fully measured. So you're not getting the light end or the heavy end, you're getting the correct class weight as observed by measuring members of the class.
Sorry, Larry, just small correction. The One Design class certificates, and there's 22 classes that you can see from the ORC website that have either ORC International or ORC Club One Design class certificates. The specific, measurement numbers on those certificates are actually based on class rules and published class rules, not a subset of what the actual measured boats were or any statistical analysis thereof. It is, so for IC-37s, for example, last year I worked closely with Cameron Church, the class manager, and we helped clarify some items in the class rules. And we use class rules and the specifications in those rules to devise the IC-37 ORC International One Design certificate. We also had some stability data based on measurements, that's not in the class rules, but wherever possible, we try to stick to what's published.
Dobbs, we may want to look a little more closely at some of the things that are on the website, because that may be, some of that stuff may be a little misleading. Thank you for correcting that, though.
You bet. Thanks.
Great.
Okay. Got time for a couple more. We did have some questions that were pre-submitted when folks signed up for the session. Would be remiss of me not to address one in particular of those. And I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. There we go. Hope I don't go dark again here, but okay, everyone should see the copy of the ORC rules there. And the question was, will 201.2 be waived? Will 201.2 be waived? That's a very interesting question. I'm going to paraphrase Rule 201.2 here. unwarranted quantities of stores shall be considered as ballast. Any liquid carried on board in excess of 2.5 liters of drinkable fluid per person per day of racing is not permitted. Well, this is unofficial, but I'm certain that will be waived for the cruise. And I think for other events, it will also be under serious consideration. So that's an unofficial answer to that question, but we couldn't let it go by. Anybody else? We're about at the end of our hour. I hope this is.
There's one more follow-up on the one design, and perhaps Dobbs can add some color here. The question that's being asked is, if you happen to have a light boat, what happens when you're not racing one design? Dobbs, perhaps.
Are you referring, Larry, to somebody who has one of the ORC one design, has a boat within one of those ORC one design classes?
Yeah, that seems to be the question that's coming from Rick. Yes.
Yes. So they can ask Nathan for, well, first of all, they have to convince Nathan that their boat is in one design class trim. Usually, besides sail measurement certificates, he likes to see some other provenance of when this boat was last done a class championship and had been through whatever that class's process is for confirming that it is in class trim. As we know, there's not many of those in the US. There are certainly some. Again, my discussion with Cam Church on this just last week was, hey, just make sure all your class members have a class certificate. That's good enough for Nathan to issue a class one design certificate. Now, if a boat is lighter than that, it's kind of up to you. If it's a club certificate, then you can declare that, and Nathan may use that. If you're declaring your boat as lighter than the one design class weight, and it's a club certificate, Nathan may use that weight. However, if you want an ORCI certificate, then there's got to be a little bit deeper digging on where that weight data came from. I hope that helps answer that question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, go ahead, Larry. I was about to wrap up, but
I guess the only other point I wanted to observe on that is a boat is only entitled to one certificate of a kind at a time. So if your ORCI certificate is a one design certificate, that is your certificate. If you want to sail out of class compliance because you want to use a code 0 for a distance race and the class doesn't have one, you can turn around and get a new certificate which supplants your one design certificate and then switch back at a later time. But at a moment in time, one fully crewed certificate, one double-handed certificate, one non-spinnaker certificate is all you can have.
I think that's a good point. That's a great point to make, Larry. I'm glad you did make that point. Okay, with an empty question box, which we do have, right, James, at this point? Almost? James, you're muted.
Yeah, I think we covered them all now. Thank you, Ed.
Yeah, okay. With that, I want to thank our panelists very much for the time this evening and the time we all put in getting ready for this evening. I want to thank Tim, for sure, Tim Hill and Stu Cerulli for all of their support. We'll be hearing more about this, everybody, and I'm sure the conversations will be lively, and we look forward to seeing everybody out on the water very soon.
And we're happy to take follow-up questions at any time. So don't hesitate to contact any of us. Probably the easiest way to do that is through the sailing office at the Yacht Club. So
that's great, Claire. I meant to add that to that last slide and it got away from me today. Is there a recommended email that you would articulate for us?
It's probably on the website.
Probably on the website. Sailing office email on the New York Yacht Club website.
Yeah.
And
right.
those questions will be answered if they're lodged there.
Yeah.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Sorry about my dark ship.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Thank you.